Welcome to Happy Planet, an impact economy podcast where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders in search of profit and planetary health. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. Today we're speaking with Maine-based entrepreneur Bernard Hidier. Originally from France, Bernard joined a Dutch startup called Finsulate with the aim of rolling it out in the American market. Finsulate provides a completely novel anti-fouling solution to boat owners. In case listeners don't know, anti-fouling is the practice of treating the bottom of a boat in order to keep it clean and free from the buildup of mussels, algae, and other organisms that can create drag, increase fuel usage, and environmental degradation. The market standard today is anti-fouling paint, but this treatment requires annual application, a big burden to boat owners, and more importantly, most anti-fouling paint is toxic and filled with plastics. Finsulate, as we will hear, takes their inspiration from nature and addresses both operational and ecological concerns. I'll let Bernard explain the rest. Good morning, Bernard. Thank you for coming to the podcast today.
Good morning, Abigail. It's great to be with you. So thank you for having me.
So I have your business card here, and I don't know if listeners can hear that, but I'm rubbing my fingers against the back of it. You have put the Finsulate solution on the back of the car, and I'm a seamstress. To me, this is like a low plush cotton velvet, and I'd kind of like to make a dress out of it, or maybe make you a vest out of it for your sales calls. To the new observer like me, it seems absolutely antithetical that you could or you would put this on the bottom of the boat, and this would help at all with anti-fouling. But so how does this work?
So the one you've got here, it's a short fiber, and for boats going at higher speeds. For bigger boats and heavier boats, we've got a longer fiber, so that's a different product. And we also developed an even longer fiber, which is extra length, and that's for actually static infrastructures. And that's also a very interesting market because when you think about docks, for example, or you think about offshore wind, all these structures are heavily impacted by marine fouling, and finding a solution that grants them a 10-year or even more, because again, we are still discovering the extent of the lifespan of our solution. So to come back to the one you have, this is a short fiber. The fiber is applied on polyurethane wrap, which is with a special glue with two elements, but it's a water-based glue. And then fibers are actually flocked on it. So it's called electrostatic flocking, which is a technology that's widely available and has been used in the car manufacturing industry. So in that sense, the idea of Rick was, and that's where he actually spent a lot of time, from the observation in nature, seeing the sea urchin next to the crab and the lobster, and seeing that the sea urchin doesn't get fouling, but the other ones do. And then saying, well, how do I replicate that? And how do I replicate that in a way where I'm not stuck in this dreadful cycle of paint, pollute, scrape, harm, repaint, pollute, rescrape, etc., etc.
So you are the co-founder of Finsulate, and you have a partner, Rick Brewer, who is also European. Before we get too much further, can you just tell us a little bit more about him?
Rick is very qualified. He's got a PhD in corrosion and a PhD in fouling. And years ago, around 2007, because he's interested in sailing, but also he's diving, he got interested in how can we address this problem. And basically, his line is like, how crazy is it? If I was going on the dock and pouring a pot of paint in the water, I could be actually sued for that. But as long as you put it at the bottom of a boat, there's no problem. Obviously, fouling is a big issue. It's a billion dollar issue worldwide because it affects everything that floats in the water, and even more, everything that moves in the water by slowing it down and increasing fuel consumption. Nevertheless, the idea was to try to find something else to do to deal with it. And this solution was coming from nature. And Rick found that the sea urchin had found a strategy to avoid fouling.
So let's get into that. There's a topic called biomimicry. What does biomimicry mean, and how does that pertain to Finsulate?
It's basically trying to find what nature has already solved that can provide you a sustainable, solution to your problem. In this case, the sea urchin through evolution, has actually developed this spiny structure on its envelope that makes it actually unwelcome, unhelpful, or
hostile.
Yeah, well, hostile, I wouldn't use that word actually, because this is exactly the contrary of what the toxic antifouling paint do. They are hostile. They kill the growth, and also they end up contaminating the environment and killing biodiversity as a result. In this case, it's not that. It's kind of a nice brush off. It's like the spiny structure on the sea urchin, and that we've replicated on the Finsulate wrap. Actually, the growth and the biofouling doesn't stick to it, and it's just like moving away from it. So it's definitely like a soft approach and a gentle brush off of the fouling coming on the structure. So basically, it's trying to have something that can last. So today we are providing actually a warranty for 5 years on those wraps, as long as they are installed by people we train. So they are Finsulate certified installers. But we have boats in Europe which have been using the same initial wrap for 7 years now. So it's kind of a discovery process of seeing how long can it go. The good thing too is at the end, you remove the wrap as you remove wallpaper, so you need heat and vapor still, and you can recycle it back in production when we reach sufficient volumes.
So I can see a great advantage to having a long-term situation, having had an oyster farm and having had to repaint boats. I think even put this on the gear. And I have to say that, we tried to go with some of the more environmentally correct anti-fouling paints, but we didn't find them very effective. And I'm embarrassed to say that we went back to the traditional paints.
So even the more bio-friendly paints are still a problem because of plastic pollution, because basically the paints are designed to dissolve in the water. So now we've got data, more data than ever. And the recent data that was collected in the Baltic Sea during 2021 by the University of Oldenburg, German university, they went into the deep sea and sequenced the different types of plastics that were contributing to the plastic pollution in the water. And they found that anti-fouling paint were responsible for 20% of this pollution, which is already kind of a big eye-opener because we all think about the bottles and the packaging. But when they went to the coastal areas and specifically to estuaries, in some places, 80% of plastic pollution was resulting from anti-fouling, which makes total sense because that's where boats are idle and waiting and just leaching. The paint is leaching through the process.
Those are incredible statistics. And so this is an urgent problem that we absolutely need to resolve right now. Tell me just about how this works. Does this slow a boat down? How does that work? You'd think that with this friction, it would slow the boat down.
So it's going to depend on every situation. And you need to have which actually I really enjoy, is having the talk with the owner. The talk with the owner will be about, first of all, you try to understand what the boat is and what the performance of the boat is. And when you're talking about planing boats and people going for high speeds, yes, there will be loss in terms of top speed at the end. And this is where the discussion with the boat owner is key. You need to understand whether they are aiming at having a better performance or keeping their performance, which means that they're going to have to push the RPMs and having more fuel consumption, or whether it's kind of a will from them to move to something that is less cumbersome, because nobody likes to scrape and repaint, and they are ready to give up on that. But when you talk about displacement hulls, you talk about sailing boats, and you talk about the whole range of deep sea shipping, etc., there's absolutely no consequence in terms of speed, but there's actually a positive side on fuel consumption, especially when you look at bigger boats, container ships, etc. Why? Because during the 5 years, we warranty the wrap, but again, we go further at the moment and we don't know how long it goes. You don't need actually to dry dock the boat, and you don't need to have the maintenance done on the anti-fouling paint. And the other reason you have is because you paint and repaint the boats, You've got full efficiency as soon as you repaint the boat, but this paint will dissolve over time. So we see that, and we've tested 3 sister ships in the North Sea, and with one equipped with Finsulate, and we could see that after over 3 years, not having to paint and repaint and scrape, we were able actually, the owner actually identified 10 to 15% fuel efficiency. But we still, now there's much more IoT and equipments that will allow us to actually measure that. But yes, you have less maintenance, so it's less operational cost and better fuel efficiency over time. So that's the idea.
Well, I think the operational cost savings is a huge one. For us as a small farm with many boats, having the time to pull the boats out even in the winter when we ran all year round was a huge distraction and disruption. And it took many people to get the boats onto a platform, and then we had to paint it. And it was really something that we really did not look forward to.
And that's exactly what I was mentioning before. One of the best part of the job is to talk to the owners. So you sit down with oyster farmer or mussel farmer, and you talk about the boats and what the boats, range is, what type of boats, what we can do, what we can, provide, and what is the adequate product for the boat. And, after a while, talking about their day, talking about what they do, suddenly more concerns come, more issues come. And you've got a question about nets. What do you do about nets? And you're going to ask a mussel farmer, why on earth are you talking about nets? You're not fishing your mussels with nets. That's how deep I went into knowing what mussel farming was. And yes, they have nets around their floats because they have a problem with birds diving to catch the mussels. These nets actually are a very, very big source of fouling, and they closed, which as a result of, I would say, stopping the flow of oxygen and nutrients to the lines. But more importantly, because they get loaded and they become almost solid. When there's a bit of stormy weather, they actually can hit the lines and they lose production to the bottom. We are able to take nets and put the fiber in the same fibers into the nets to make them less friendly. And we've tested them in Turkey, actually in aquaculture pens, open pens in the sea, and we see the results. And then you talk about ropes, and then you talk about docks, and you talk about
Well, we could certainly have used that on the oyster farm. We had wild mussel spawn covering our gear. It was invisible because the gear was a black, shiny sort of plastic. And then the mussels were black and shiny and teeny and tiny. And it took a while to realize they were even there. And then you could wipe them off with your hand and you'd have a handful of baby mussel seeds. So if you could have put this velvety topping on our oyster bags, it would have been a huge, huge help to us. So that is fascinating. You could truly cut down the time to aquaculture people in their line maintenance and their gear maintenance. That is unbelievable.
One of the interesting things, as you refer to oysters, a sector you know very well, obviously, it's hatcheries. And they are actually the biggest place where they've got a lot of biofouling, marine biofouling. And obviously, they can't put paint next to anything because it would actually kill the growth and kill actually the oyster babies. So this is really what we are looking also to be a multi-service to the aquaculture and fishery market. And that's been actually for Maine, and Maine being the center of our strategy for the US, we've decided to go and focus on aquaculture and fishery. Why? Because we think these people are very sensitive to cost effectiveness, and also by getting this kind of confirmation of the value of what we're doing from these hardworking and passionate people, then we will be able actually naturally to go into other sectors, and especially the recreational boats that we are already very active in Europe.
That's amazing, Bernard. I mean, we were not a hatchery, but we had an upweller. And this was a real concern for us when we went to figure out how to defoul the upweller, because we had the bins where we put the tiny little larval oysters. And, we were never confident that the anti-fouling paint that we were putting in there, even though it was sort of bio and eco-friendly, that wasn't a nuisance to the little critters we had in there. So it's just really, truly amazing, all the applications that you can create from this. So what most strikes me is it's such an out-of-the-box solution
to such a common problem. And I know this space, because of the environmental issues that you mentioned, is getting a lot of new entrants. Is there anybody that's come up with anything remotely as sort of original as this in the market?
I think the first move that was done by a lot of paint producers was to adjust to what the IMO regulations started putting at the international level. And this IMO regulation started prohibiting zinc and limiting copper. So they started actually lowering and finding other components. Nevertheless, again, I'm pointing now to the plastic pollution, and that doesn't solve the plastic pollution because the paint goes away. Every year in the world, 100 million liters, so that's, let's say, 25 million gallons of paints, of anti-fouling paints are sold. So it's going somewhere. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is people have been using ultrasounds and have been trying to find different strength and structure to paints. But again, it's not proven to be not harmful to the organisms affected by it. The good thing with Finsulate is there's no harm. It just brushes away and makes unwelcoming to growth, but there's no action to growth. So we see also people doing quite a lot of research into organic processes that will kind of prevent an organism to come, but we don't know the long-term consequences of that. Again, with us, it's definitely out of this box of harming or deterring growth, but by having a direct action on the medium or on the target, I would say. So it's a very different approach. It's a mechanical anti-fouling.
It's an approach that has also gotten you quite a few accolades recently.
That's true.
Tell me about Top Gun.
Yeah, so Top Gun is actually, I would say, the top of the iceberg. I was very fortunate to be selected for Top Gun Maine Center for Entrepreneurs here in the Maine. And it was also following the fact that last year I was selected as one of the 3 main companies participating to Clean Tech Open nationwide. I really enjoyed that program with the Maine Center of Entrepreneurs because it's a small cohort. We were 26 companies and there was 15 weeks. You connect to a lot of mentors based in Maine, and basically we're still in touch. So despite the fact that I won, and obviously some people are disappointed, we'd still be in touch. And with some of them, actually, we collaborate directly because some people are in aquaculture and fishery sectors. So this is a natural collaboration, but even people wider than that. So that was what happened last month. At the same time, or 2 weeks before, in France, we got actually a big award. It's a competition that's called Ocean Pitch Challenge, and it's co-organized with Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which is based out of the West Coast, and the French Ministry for the Sea, because yes, we have a French Ministry for the Sea.
Of course you do.
Yes, that's great. And we won the big prize. So it was 86 competitors. So that's a big one. But also there were special prizes this year, and we got 2 out of 3, which were biomimicry and biodiversity. So this is a big boost for us. But going back in time, Rick was awarded European Inventor of the Year by the European Patent Office back in 2019.
It's not surprising this idea has been recognized so widely, and I'm sure there's more to come. We will continue my conversation with Bernard in just a minute. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Maine Venture Fund is a state-sponsored venture fund here in Maine with a mission to support the highest potential Maine-based startup companies by investing early-stage capital. Maine Venture Fund's goal is to accelerate job growth and economic opportunity for the people of Maine. Learn more at mainventurefund.com. Welcome back to Happy Planet.
Bernard, you are a French entrepreneur living now in Maine, the state that most resembles your home province of Brittany. Can you tell me a little bit more of how you ended up here from France?
Yeah, so first of all, I need to make a slight correction. So I'm originally from south of Brittany, and the area is called Vendée, and people are very, picky about that. But yes, yeah, Brittany is really the place where I've been developing business for the last probably 12 years in different sectors. And the reason I'm landed in Maine in a way 4 years ago is not linked to the business I was involved in, which is biogas from waste and building circular economy systems, but it's more linked to my family history. And I lived in the US at the end of the 90s, met my wife, then took her from her family, and we spent 17 years in London, UK. And 4 years ago, my in-laws faced some difficulties, health problems. And we decided to pack up and come here and build a house and put 3 generations under the same roof. And despite the prognosis that was not so good, especially for my mother-in-law, we're still all together. So basically, we've got parents, grandparents, and grandchildren all together in Maine, in Yarmouth. And that's the reason I came here. And the thing I heard when I came here 4 years ago is BYOJ, bring your own job. So that's what I've been working on.
Well, I've heard that too about Maine. People who come from away need to generally bring their own job, but then there's people like you who are creating jobs. I think Maine has some exciting things going on right now that you're tapping into. That leads us to our next question. How are you going to roll this out, and are there any bottlenecks?
There are bottlenecks. To give you an example, we did the first boat in aquaculture probably a month ago, but then we faced the fact that we got demand for our next one, and we couldn't find people to do the sandblasting, soda blasting for removing the paint. So I think in every sector, you face the same problem with availability of qualified staff. However, the first boat gave us the opportunity to train people that will be Finsulate installer. So we go step by step. What we're looking at to do at the moment is actually strike some partnerships with boatyards and mariners, because this is the natural partners to be able to have one among the different offers they have as services, to have the Finsulate wrap as a service, as well as having any other service they provide to their clients. So this is where I think we'll be able to tackle this issue of what we see everywhere in the supply chains or in the work environment, is the lack of people at the time you need them. And especially when you deal with aquaculture, you need to realize that these people need to minimize their time of getting the boat out of the water and being able to put it back when they want. And this is where we need to be good at serving them. But in Maine, again, we've got a lot of boats, in leisure boats, that will get out of the water in November, December for the winter. And we hope, and we're building everything at the moment to have an efficient website, a full team able to answer questions, study every case by probably early September to be able to book all this work during winter and use facilities that will be winterized, so where we can do our installation in the perfect way.
Amazing. So is this going to be a self-funded project, or do you fundraise? How do you create the capital that you need to do this rollout?
Yeah, we will raise the money when we decide to do it. I've got a lot of interest from people because they love the idea. It's very important for us to, at the moment, really like to group after having won this important award with the Top Gun program. And now we are actually building the structure, hiring people and making sure we can start something and getting the structure right and being able to have the service that we can deliver. I think in the next 2-3 months, probably 3 months, yes, we will be back and start raising capital.
I'm sure you're going to have good luck with that. You know, I've heard you speak on many different times, and you speak very thoroughly and interestingly on this topic of innovation. Can you tell our listeners what you think makes a good innovation? Specifically, you mentioned the French philosopher Gabriel Tarde and the social responsibility that goes along with innovation. Just talk a bit about that.
If you look at the history of the world, it's quite striking. It's like up to the 16th century, being an innovator was someone who was actually almost a heretic, someone breaking from the system. I must say, in some of my activities, I'm not talking about Finsulate, but in France, at times, I feel like a heretic, especially when I allow like farmers to break from the system where they have to get their fertilizer from imports and they can produce their own energy. It's not always welcome. So probably we are like back before the 16th century. Since then, it has been seen as something new, but in a positive way. But it's true, like there was this window in the 19th century when this philosopher described it as something that needs to be for the common good. I think the 20th century and I would say the development of market economy and capitalism has made it more something that you study through like the same kind of canvas. Now that everyone has an MBA, it needs to go through the selection of the Excel spreadsheet. But this common good aspect is kind of at times lost in the picture. But what really drives me is to be able to do something where I think something impactful. I don't think at individual level you can change the world, but we can all do something at all level, and everyone can be an innovator. And that's really my conviction. I think it shouldn't be coined as something where you need to be at MIT or having a degree of anything. It's everyone can have an impact on the people around them. And that can be just saying hello and smiling to people and ask them how they're doing today. It's everything is, important.
Well, I appreciate that global perspective on innovation and entrepreneurship. You touched on something that I'm really interested in because I've been working with startups in France and the US and working with investors in both continents. And I'm wondering, do you feel like there's a difference in attitudes in entrepreneurship and startup culture in Europe and the United States? And if so, what could they be?
To be honest, I think France has progressed spectacularly over the last 10 years in terms of, I would say, mimicking what's going on in the US. However, France remains a very different context in terms of support to, companies, tax system, etc., etc. There are important efforts done in order to promote the emergence of startups. I think the big problem probably for France is to be able to keep them in France. What I mean by that is France has become a very attractive economy for investment. But when you dig up a bit, you realize that actually a lot of that money is coming from outside. It's interesting in the US, what's striking, it's that people are able to understand that they're taking a risk by being okay with it, which is not in the kind of natural European culture and probably even less in the French culture. So basically it's like, okay, we think we have an idea, we might fail, but that's okay. Failure is not such a big issue in the US context, I think, in the US culture. In France, it can mark you for life.
I've seen a lot of encouragement around this notion that failure is okay in France. And I think it's very refreshing and it's very liberating.
Yeah, it seems that the new generation has understood that actually. What's there to lose? What's the big deal? Right. Go for it. You've got an idea, go for it. And it's emerging now. It's a big evolution compared to, I would say, 10 years ago even. I mean, again, America is always the leader and show the way in good and bad. I mean, in terms of habits, consumption habits, etc. So I think France is definitely aiming at replicating what's being done in the US. However, I would think on the side, I would say there is at the local level, but this is also what I find in Maine, which I find interesting, an interest for long-term investing for projects or companies that will have a systemic impact and social benefits. But otherwise, it's also look at Maine. It's how many banks do you have in Maine? Because it's coming from this mutual kind of, a small community building a bank to help each other. My parents, my grandpa, my father were head of the local community bank in my village, and people would put their money together to help, someone finance a new barn. And so this is still, I think, ingrained in the mentality of Maine. And that's why you still have a network of so many different banking institutions. So yes, so there is that. And I hope that this in a way needs obviously to be optimized, but this quality of contact and approach between financiers or investors and the companies that they will help grow is very important. We need not to end up into a big system, and I've seen that done somewhere else, and it's not the perfect way. I think this proximity is very important.
Yes, I do think that Maine has a particular interest and appetite right now for investing locally and building long-term companies that are going to create jobs so that not everybody has to bring their own job to Maine, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think
that's the way forward for growth. Totally agree. What advice would you give to fellow entrepreneurs who are looking to be entrepreneurs or getting their hands dirty in the entrepreneurial sector?
My advice is, I don't have advice. Just go with your guts. You have an idea, especially if you're in the US, you'll find support. And if you're in Maine, you'll find even more support. I'm positive about that. There's such a fantastic structure here of institutions and organizations to help you, to provide you support, and SCORE and the Chambers of Commerce. Maine Center for Entrepreneurs, or the New England Ocean Cluster, which have been actually fantastic people. And I'm so happy to have been with them from the start, from the onset. Name it. There's so many people around. There's great pool of mentors in all these competitions. Like I was mentioning, like the Top Gun and the others. This is people who are ready to talk to you and give you an advice and see how it goes.
It was a pleasure to chat with Bernard, and I'm very happy to report that since we spoke, Bernard has landed several clients and is now starting to raise money to hire new salespeople. I unexpectedly ran into Bernard at the Newport International Boat Show in September. He had a Finsulate booth and was making quite a splash. For more information about Finsulate, check out the links in our show notes. I certainly wish him great success so that we can put an end to toxic and plastic-laden anti-fouling methods. Thank you for listening. Please follow the Happy Planet podcast wherever you listen and leave us a rating and review. It really helps new listeners discover the show. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by Abigail Carroll. I am the executive producer. The talented Dylan Hoyer is our producer and editor. Composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetcapital.com.